Hello, everybody. It is April 5th, 2025, here in the United States of America. Now, I'm not making a very long video today. I got a pretty bad cough. I got a cough drop in right now, and I'm chugging water to make it through this video. But, I'm supposed to do an upload every Wednesday and Saturday, so I want to stick to that schedule. When you get married and you got a house full of kids and you're around kids in general a lot more, I noticed that I tend to get sick a lot more. Well, that's okay. I'll make it through. Anyways, what I want to talk about real quick is there's one thing I see in the West that I think has become an issue for us in regards to making any kind of political decision. And this goes for the right and the left, but we've become a very emotionally driven people. We don't think pragmatically. We're very idealistic. You have the right is the West is kind of divided up into two political camps for the most part. You have what I would say the neo-lib slash progressive camp, which has this worldview, this goal they wish to work towards to reshape society into something more equitable and fair, whether it's a realistic goal or not, or whether their methods are realistic and pragmatic. And then you have, let's say, the right wing slash populist camp that, although I think their ideas are more well grounded in reality, perhaps not all of them are, and there's still nations to govern where half the population is, no matter who wins an election, half the population is going to be resentful and rebellious, if you will, against whatever change that political party is trying to implement. We're very polarized people. Again, I think one of the issues, we've sort of lost our way in regards to our own identity. We've really latched ourselves onto political causes. Like, people in the West are very, very, very political people. In the United States, every time there's an election, it's an existential crisis. It's the election that's going to determine our future. If this election doesn't go our way, everything's over. And it's this cycle every 4 years. We're so married to political ideology that if our specific political ideology isn't the one that's currently in power, then our entire world basically ends, and it's time to run for the bunkers and run for the hills and hide in our basements, and that's not healthy. It's really not healthy, and it also makes it easy to lead Western people around by the nose. Just throw them some political slogans, make them some promises, get them riled up emotionally about a cause, and you can pretty much lead us, wherever we would need to be led for whatever purposes. We tend to invest ourselves very heavily in foreign causes, not so much our own. There's a lot of people in Western countries that have made their entire identity about supporting Ukraine and the Russian-Ukraine war without really understanding the dynamics of the war or like any kind of practical outcome. I mean, you have people in the West that it's really sad, stark difference. But like, if you see interviews with Ukrainian soldiers that are fighting in this war, they talk about how basically all their friends are dead. Their life expectancy is several weeks. People are being pulled off the streets, and it's a slaughter. And then you kind of juxtapose that with the liberal suburban soccer mom who's cheering on the Ukrainian army like this is like a sports team. They're completely divested and separated from the reality of this conflict, in which it's an absolute bloodbath. It's probably the worst conflict. It is the worst conflict Europe has seen since the end of World War II. And people treat it like they're cheering for a sports team. Let's get those filthy orcs, push them out of Ukraine, push them back to the 1991 borders. Yeah, well, let's get Putin. And we're dancing. We were not, as I think, as much anymore, but we were dancing very precariously close to, a nuclear war. I've seen, I've had plenty of interactions, where I think people were cheering for like a direct confrontation with the Russian Federation, between the United States and the Russian Federation. And again, it's not the people that would go and fight. And then you try to explain to them, again, you're cheering this on like you're cheering for a sports team. But if we get the United States gets into a direct military confrontation with the Russian Federation or China, for example, or like just another world war, there will be a draft. There will by necessity have to be a draft because we don't have a large enough military to fight that kind of high intensity conflict. And again, like if there is a draft, then I don't think these people realize like their nephews and sons and relatives would be the one getting drafted and they would likely die. But again, like the reality of like conflict and consequences politically and socially and economically and militarily, like we're completely divorced from reality on those things. And like we almost treat politics again like I do say we do treat it like an existential crisis, but also on the flip side of that too, it's also treated like a religion or like cheering for a sports team. Something. It's not just, hey, I just want to vote for this guy because I like his tax policy better. It's this political party encompasses my entire worldview. This entire narrative that's been fed to me my entire life, and I must fight for it with every inch of my being. And even if that means cutting off my relatives and friends, then so be it. There's plenty of interactions I've had where one of the first things that gets brought up is politics. And I tell my own family, like, listen, I have no interest in talking about politics because none of it matters. It's not going to be some geriatric. I'm not saying none of it matters at all. It does matter, but it's not some geriatric politician from Washington, D.C. that's going to be at your bedside in your final moments. It's going to be your family. So again, like if you're getting so emotionally invested and caught up in American politics to the point where, you just end up alone and miserable because you've cut off all your family over policies that, frankly, the average person doesn't have much influence over, then I think you've kind of lost your way. And I think the West in general has become like that. We're very hyper politicized people. We're not pragmatic on much of anything. It's always left versus right. Everything is like I've said before earlier in this video, an existential crisis, some kind of fight for freedom, a fight for liberation. Like we don't know how to govern ourselves. We don't know how a nation even functions. You have people that earnestly believe that you can import like 100 million people, bring them into your country with no effort to assimilate anybody or even learn the local language or even care about the local customs and cultures, and then you would just have a functioning country. Again, that's based off this idea that, we're all one in Kumbaya and we can all just sit around a fire and hold hands and sing songs. And unfortunately, human beings just don't function like that. You know what I mean? But you can't have a rational discussion on any of these issues with people. People become, again, like hyperpolarized, emotional about it. It interferes with their worldview and like their moral view on things where like you especially in Europe, and I've seen this a lot too, it's like you can't really have a pragmatic conversation on immigration and letting in refugees and the actual social and economic consequences of those kinds of policies. Again, because you immediately see people get shot down and called all sorts of names, bigots, racists, and what have you. Again, it's because so many people are just married to this cause they have to fight for. They're going to make a better world. We're going to make a more equitable world. We're going to make a more civilized and peaceful world. We're all going to coexist together like it's Star Trek or something. And and that goes to like European and American leadership too. And I think it's worse in Europe than it is in America currently. But again, it's just this complete divorce from reality. You have this, hyper emotional idealism versus, real world pragmatism. And it's just everything is being run from this standpoint of ideology, of not actually looking at social and political consequences, not being able to let go of certain policies because of the emotional attachment to them. And, that's, again, I should probably take the cap off this. One of our biggest issues overall is that. And I'm not just saying I'm not just picking on the left wing. I mean, I'd say in the United States too, we do have I'm gonna cut this off here pretty soon. Really struggling, but the right, the United States, like hyper-partisan Republicans and whatnot, make the libs cry, expunge the libs from political society, and yada yada yada. Yeah, well, I agree. There's a certain segment of the American liberal voter bloc that has kind of lost their way and are voting for things that are outright insane. There's still plenty of liberals that are good, well-meaning people, and they're still your neighbors at the end of the day. Like, they're still citizens that are going to vote. I mean, we should try to have a policy again to try to bring as many people into one camp as possible for the sake of preserving peace, prosperity, and stability. I mean, you can't be too much of a loose cannon and too hostile to your political adversaries. It's just, again, it's not productive. Like, what do you do though if every American election is perpetually an existential crisis for one side or the other? Eventually that's going to give, and then you end up with like a civil war or some kind of revolution, and then things get really, really bad. So I think across the West, people need to take a step back, step away from ideology. I'm not saying all ideology is bad. I mean, you should have a good moral compass or good moral basis. Like, I'm an Orthodox Christian, so many of my personal opinions on things and personal moral positions are informed by my beliefs and whatnot. I'm not saying all ideology is a bad thing, but if you're so married to a policy, despite how detrimental it is, because you can't let it go, because again, it's like an integral part to your ideology, despite how destructive it might be, then I think that's a problem, and that exists on both sides of the political spectrum. I'm not trying to be a centrist here, but I'm just saying, like, okay, outright unrestrained, naked, capitalism and corporatism is not a good thing. So if you're on the right and you're just married to that, regardless of the threat it poses to like the environment and to long-term economic stability or like wealth inequality, then you might have a problem. And if you're on the left and like say you're the most ardent communist imaginable, where you think every single person with more than $1 million in their pocket should be lined up against the wall, and you're not going to contribute to a functioning well-working society at all. Like, that's just not tenable. This idea that like you're just going to get rid of the cops and jails and everyone's going to be free and you can release all the murderers and criminals from prison, no prisons and no consequences for everything, and social workers can take care of all the problems. Like, it's not a realistic policy to have at all. You'd end up with the absolute nightmare. Like, no human civilization on this planet has ever functioned like that, nor will it ever. So if people don't return to more pragmatic and realistic ideas in regards to public policy as well as foreign policy, then I think the West in general is facing some serious trouble. And I don't know if nationalist revolutions are the things that are really going to fix these problems long term. Again, because once that nationalist revolution happens, then you're still left with a very large segment of that population that immediately is going to rebel as hard as they can against the new establishment because of their own hardcore ideological political beliefs. But anyways, that's really all I wanted to talk about in this video. I'm going to cut this short because I'm kind of struggling right now to talk. But anyways, I'll post another video Wednesday. Still not sure what the next subject's going to be. I got to kind of re-up on the news a little bit and decide what I feel like talking about. But anyways, I hope everyone out there has a great day.